Good afternoon. We are going to resume Council Bill 21-0080, the ordinance of estimates for fiscal year ending in June 30th, 2022. I'm sitting in as chairman for the committee. I'd like to start off by introducing Shantae Jackson from the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood and Safety Engagement, and you can introduce anybody else on your team that you'd like, and then go into your presentation. I see we are joined by council members McCray, Burnett, Ramos, Dorsey, and I think I got everybody. So Shantae, take it away.
And Middleton.
Oh, and Middleton, sorry, there you go. And Council Vice President Sharon Middleton. Yeah, I just saw your screen pop up, so the order of the boxes just got messed up.
Yeah, we lost you at the state's attorney's thing, so I just want to let you know I picked up where you left off.
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, the WebEx just crashed, like out of nowhere.
I figured that.
And then I logged back in, and it wouldn't let me unmute for some reason. But we're back in business.
All right, thanks.
So Shantae, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, council members, for having us today. As the chair mentioned, my name is Shantae Jackson. I'm the director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. With me in the room is one of the members of my senior lead team, Brianne Young. She serves as our fiscal administrator. And on the line with you all are the other two members of my senior lead team, Nick Wilson, who is the Associate Director of Policy Planning and Coordination, and Rashad Singletary, who is the Associate Director of Gun Violence Prevention. Brianne, when you're ready, we'll start the presentation. So the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, or MONSE, which is what we call it for short, is made up of 4 services. The first service is building public safety, is criminal justice coordination. It's service number 617. The recommended budget for fiscal year 22 is a little under $3.8 million. This really drives the collaboration that my agency is responsible for across local, state, and federal partners that operate within the boundaries of Baltimore City, and involves us convening those agencies to implement evidence-based programs to increase safety and healing in our communities. You all have heard the mayor talk very passionately about restarting the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council that sits here, as do other initiatives, including the Public Safety Advisory Commission and the Violence Prevention Task Force. Both of those bodies were created through legislation that last year's council and previous councils passed. So we work alongside community partners to review data, identify problems, and develop appropriate and effective responses. And the work that sits inside of this as it relates to personnel is around intimate partner violence or domestic violence, sexual assault response, and human trafficking. It's worth noting here that not just here, but across the other services as we continue this conversation, that in the upcoming fiscal year, I'll be reviewing the performance measures to determine applicability by service, and potentially making some changes to the performance measures that we'll be using around output and or effectiveness. Next slide, please, Bree. The next service is Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. That priority outcome is building public safety. It's service number 618, and our recommended budget for 2022 for this is about $16.4 million. This is where the crux of most of the work of my agency sits. This is where the Safe Streets work lives. It's where the group violence reduction strategy work lives and will continue to live. It's where our ROCA work happens and where youth diversion happens. It's important to note here that this is really where all of our evidence-based approaches sit to make sure that we're successfully reducing gun violence and increasing safety in our neighborhoods, and making sure that we do that in ways that engage community stakeholders, religious partners, our young people, our elders, nonprofits, and businesses in Baltimore. A couple of major budget notes here I think it makes sense to bring your attention to is that Monty recently received $1.3 million in special grant funding from many stakeholders for the 3-year group violence reduction strategy to begin in fiscal year 2022, and that the budget continues to support 10 Safe Street sites with about 2.3 million of that funding coming from general funds and 5 million coming from state funds. Next slide, please, Bree. The next service is Service 757, which is the City Watch service with a priority outcome of building public safety. The requested ask for the budget for City Watch is $3.2 million. This service is responsible for managing well over 800 of the city's closed circuit TV systems that are positioned all around Baltimore City. And the City Watch system is one that involves the Baltimore City Police Department, BSIT, our office, and other external stakeholders. Monty is primarily responsible for the City Watch rebate program for neighbors and for businesses who are interested in connecting their camera systems into the City Watch program, which was also a part of legislation that I believe was passed last fiscal year through this council. Just a quick budget note here is that the budget is maintaining the funding of $2.4 million for the CCTV systems and about $750,000 for ShotSpotter. And last slide, please, Bree. And this final service, 758, is really about the administration of the work that we're doing. The requested budget amount for this is about $1.5 million. This is really where all of the management and administrative personnel sit. It is also where most of our pursuit of grant funding happens to make sure that we are able to serve as a pass-through for community-based funding programs and really digging deep to make sure that we're establishing effective strategies for sustainable programming. Mr. Chair, this concludes my slide presentation. Thank you, Bree.
Thank you very much. You can pull down the presentation. Okay, so the first question I have, you mentioned about the camera rebate program. How many people have started applying for that program?
So we've got roughly over 100 folks that have applied for the program and have either received vouchers and or rebates through the camera system. I would say that we've been pretty impressed by this initial rollout, given that it's not something that was broadly communicated. And in the upcoming fiscal year, we anticipate extending more of a reach into communities to let them know that this is something that they can sign on to.
Gotcha. And so can you just explain the process for those who are watching, how they can apply, and what are the odds of them actually receiving one of these grants?
Absolutely. So anyone can apply. An application can be made via the baltimorecity.gov website. I believe it's citywatch/baltimorecity.gov or search for City Watch on the Baltimore City website. Anyone that has a camera in the Baltimore, within the boundaries of Baltimore City, whether through a business or as an individual resident, can either apply for a rebate if they have already paid for a camera, or apply for a voucher if they meet eligibility requirements for the voucher. I would say that there aren't many folks that get turned down. The application process is one that's relatively simple. It is something that's 100% online right now. I'm actively having conversations with BSIT team members to make sure that the application is as accessible as we can make it for those folks that may have digital access issues. But I would say overwhelmingly, we see folks who are applying get approved.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Council Vice President Middleton.
I guess it's more of a statement. Hi, Shante, how are you?
I'm well, Councilwoman. How are you?
Good. So, I give you kudos for starting off your program in a very unified way throughout the communities. Know Rashad Singletary very well, and just excited about his elevation, I'll call it. I know we have the Safe Streets program in Park Heights was one of the first to start in the city, and just hopeful that can continue to work in that area. Um, your office is definitely needed. I know you have been just doing some strategic outreach. I know that you had started with these breakfasts that you personally have in the districts, and I know that that's just not to, have breakfast. You're engaging and visiting just every district, and just learning the best way you can all the areas of our city, and I just think that that's very creative, and we need more creative uh, things like that to show that our neighborhoods are connected in many ways. And that's all a part of this movement in trying to help to make our city safe. So I will end with this. Um, are you like part of, you have to know what's going on in the police department. You have to know what's going on in um, some of the initiatives that are helping with crime. Can you just briefly delve a little bit into that so we know that you are on the right track in engagement?
Sure, absolutely. Um, and I would say thanks for the acknowledgement of the tour that the team has been doing across Baltimore City. For those of us that are lifelong Baltimoreans, it's been really important to us to make sure that every single neighborhood knows that we see them as neighbors and we see them as co-producers of public safety. That while the violence prevention plan that we've put together is one that the mayor's drafted, he absolutely believes that it is one that we must co-create together, that it has to be Baltimore's plan. With regard to your question specifically about our engagement with BPD, um, some folks on the council may remember that I am one of the original members of the Baltimore Consent Decree monitoring team. Um, Having not applied for the job and being specifically chosen to be the community engagement liaison for the monitoring team, it is very near and dear to my heart that we make sure that we get the reformations associated with the consent decree right, and also that this agency, as its director, that we're partnering with BPD appropriately. So a couple of key examples around how that's happened. One, our violence prevention plan was in part drafted um, as a part of our review of the consent decree and the police commissioner's crime plan and the mayor's public safety plan and the health department's violence prevention plan. We are managing the neighborhood policing plan project that the BPD is spearheading right now in 2 pilot areas in the Western District and in the Southern Districts. So I'm responsible for managing that project in partnership with them. With regard to meetings, I meet with the police commissioner, he and I, one-on-one every 2 weeks, like clockwork. We have each other on speed dial. I often am having conversations with his team members. In fact, Deputy Commissioner Briscoe and her team and I meet every single Friday, not only to talk about the neighborhood policing plans, but to also talk about the group violence reduction strategy and the work that that is going to take in order for us to execute it successfully in partnership with BPD and the state's attorney's office. So those are just a few examples of where I'm partnering directly with BPD.
Thank you so much. And just remember, we're all here to work together and help you be successful, as well as help our city to move forward.
I appreciate that. I'll be coming your way.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Jackson, for everything that you're doing. And we had a good meeting about the violence prevention strategy in my district. So you got a lot of feedback there, which was great. My question is around Service 617 with criminal justice coordination. It looks like you're going to be redoing a lot of the indicators here. Could we maybe even our public safety committee see what those are going to be moving forward, and when might you have those?
Thank you for the question, Councilwoman Ramos. As I mentioned before, it is my full intention to review all of the performance measures that were in place before becoming the director of the office to make sure, to Councilman Costello's point in an earlier meeting, that they are applicable to the service and that they aren't just about us doing the job that we're supposed to do to begin with. Given the impending finalization of the violence prevention plan, which is going to be happening literally in a day and a week from now on June 15th, I would say that we would be ready to have a conversation with the Public Safety Advisory Committee sometime in late June or early July around what those performance measures would be.
And the council's Public Safety Committee as well. I guess my colleague, the chair, will ask you about that at some point. But and does that include also the 618? Because a lot of the indicators talk about ROCA in 618.
It includes every service.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's great. And then does the DOJ funding is that general operating, the DOJ funding from the federal government, or is that for something specific?
Which service are you looking at in particular?
I'm looking at 618.
Bear with me here.
And I had seen budget includes that supports, it's on page 133 at the very top.
Oh, thank you. I was still stuck on 132 here. I would need to follow up with you on that question.
Okay, that would be that would be great. That's my two questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
That is a question that we need to follow up on, please.
Nina, do you have that request? All right, Councilwoman Ramos, can you just repeat that request one more time?
Yes, on page 133 of the budget book, on the very top, it says that the budget includes 3.6 million of DOJ funding. And I was wondering what that's specifically for, because it's for all three agencies to work together. But it doesn't say what it's the purpose is for.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, next one I see on my screen here, Councilman Dorsey. Is your foot doing all right?
It's feeling kind of funny. You know, these things are weird like that. I'm not terribly allergic, but it's definitely odd to walk around now.
Well, we're glad to have you back after that that injury. Hopefully you don't file a workers' comp claim.
That's an interesting thing. It's, you know, better than having the whole hive that I had in my house last week. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, Shantae. Thanks for your work and for having this team and being willing to be part of leadership here for the city and continue your leadership role in the city and now for the city, I would say. I just like to make that distinction that you've been a leader in this city long before taking this role in government, and it's just so glad to have you as a partner. I have a question that's kind of a little bit outside of your direct bailiwick here, and I'm not sure even how to phrase this as a question. I'm deeply concerned about the police department's plan to encrypt their radios. I have found that in the interest of improving transparency, openness, and an understanding of what actually happens day to day, night to night within the patrol division and operations of the department, that that scanning the police and having transparency about what calls for service actually look like. I think that this has been valuable and in the public's interest to be laid bare. And I'm very concerned about the plan, um, especially seeming like it's directly in response to people actually listening and scanning. And I'm not aware of any direct need for the radios to be encrypted. And I don't know what the question is here, except for how can this be anything but in conflict with the interest of growing transparency in the way that I think the consent decree wants us to.
Thank you for the question, Councilman. I would say that I'm not aware enough or informed enough about the encryption of radios to feel confident in providing a response right now, and am happy to follow up on your question.
I mean,
Thank you.
BPD is coming in at 6 p.m.
6
So,
o'clock, right?
Councilman, if you can hold that question for
Asking them
2
about it.
hours,
Yeah, I will definitely be asking them about it as well.
sounds good.
But it is imminent. I understand it is to happen on July 1st, and that um, certain um, groups will be given access. Like the legit media, like the Sun, I guess, will be given access to listen, but others who perform, I believe, a contemporary journalistic function in our media environment will apparently not be given that access. So the public will be cut off by the services that they provide. Um, so
We can have that conversation in 2 hours.
yeah, I look forward to a follow-up though. Thank you, Shantae. Keep up the good work. Love to have a breakfast up in my neck of the woods.
You just need to tell me what place.
All right, cool. We'll do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilman.
Okay, next up, Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and on behalf of the 8th District, y'all welcome. We have one of the strongest District 8 residents leading this agency.
District great, as we call it, District great.
Hashtag follow it. So I had one question that was kind of in the weeds, and thank you for your service as well. I would second that. You've been doing this for a long time, and so it's glad to see you in the building. One was a little bit in the weeds. Service 618 shows a pretty large unallocated appropriation. Can you speak on that? I was just curious as to what that was.
Yes, I can tell you that I honestly just learned what unallocated allocation meant as I stepped into this role here, or appropriation rather. So the $2.5 million that you see here in the fiscal year 22 budget accounts for grant dollars that we believe that we will be getting in during the fiscal year. And because it hasn't been allocated, if you will, to a specific program space, it's listed as unallocated appropriation.
And is that the, I was reading, it's like the group violence reduction funds. I guess if you could speak to, I don't expect you to know every single dollar where it's coming from, but I guess broadly, what are some of the expected, I guess, large dollar grants coming into the agency and what they'll be used for?
Right. So the unallocated appropriation that you referenced associated with Service 617 is for criminal justice coordination. Right. So just want to make sure that we're differentiating that from Service 618, in which the group violence reduction strategy sits, and there are special grant dollars and probably some unallocated um, appropriation there as well. So for Service 617, we anticipate that in the upcoming fiscal year, we're really going to be digging deeper into our victim services supports. And when we talk about victim services, we're talking about those folks who are victims of intimate partner violence, sexual assault response. We're talking about human trafficking victims. We're talking about gun violence victims. We know that the domestic violence in our city has increased exponentially, with 20% of our homicides being domestic violence related. The first one of this year, in fact, being intimate partner violence. And so making sure that we're dedicating the resources necessary, not only to provide survivor supports, but to also go further upstream to make sure that we are identifying potential victims sooner rather than later. Here's a great opportunity for me to call out something that's near and dear to your heart, the Anti-Human Trafficking Collaborative that you're a co-chair on with one of our team members has been really successful in training our first responders in and around Baltimore City, with the Baltimore City Fire Department having saved, on average, 1 life per month by identifying victims of human trafficking and referring them to our Blue Dot program. And so we'd like to see an increase in the number of these referrals with other partner agencies such as BPD and other first responders that come into contact with potential victims first. So you're going to see us really focus in on the additional supports that we could be providing victims here in this space.
Got it. Thank you. Second in the weed question, and then my next round I have more like program stuff. Well, one is more of a, I guess this one's more of a comment. Service 757 City Watch. I was excited to see the addition of the uptime metric. That is a complaint I receive a lot from constituents related to City Watch, is where the cameras may not be working, or there's sort of a perception that none of them work, which I know for sure is not true. I've actually been to City Watch. I guess my question on it, I'm glad it's one being put out there as a metric. Is that something that is currently being tracked? And if so, where are we looking like right now as far as that program being operational? If not, I'm happy to just follow along as that data becomes a little bit more available for discussion.
So I'm happy to provide a follow-up answer to whether or not it's currently being tracked or how long it's been tracked. I'm going to assume that it has been tracked at least within the last fiscal year, given that there was a fiscal year 21 target of 96%, that BPD is doing some level of tracking here around the uptime of the cameras, but I'm happy to follow up directly with them.
Perfect. I'll take that.
As a follow-up item, please.
And those are my two questions, Mr. Chair. I'll come back around.
Thank you very much, Councilman Cohn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's great to see you, Director Jackson. Thanks for the hustle and the work you're putting in on getting to know community and doing it the right way. And thanks also for your partnership on the Trauma-Informed Care Task Force. Looking forward to having you on there. So I'm really concerned about making sure the group violence reduction strategy doesn't fail for a third time in our city. We know that in a previous iteration, at least what I heard was that we really didn't do the piece around providing people a way out of violence. And so it failed, right? If you bring a group of people together and say you've got two options, option A is going to be punitive and we're going to crack down if you continue to commit crime, and option B is we're going to help provide you with a pathway toward opportunity and a job and housing and healthcare and all these things that everybody deserves. But if we don't do our part on option B, not only does someone then go to option A and continue to commit crime, but it also undermines faith in all of us that we can actually deliver. So given that history, how are you thinking about this third bite at the apple and how we can not fail our city again? Like how much, and I know you don't know this yet, but like how much does that cost? How much effort does that take? What does it look like to actually do it right?
Thank you for the question, Councilman, and I appreciate your partnership as well as we seek to reduce trauma long-term in our city. Um, your point's well taken about the 2 times that we did not get focused deterrence on the group violence reduction strategy right. Want to be really clear in sharing with the rest of Baltimore that there are 3 reasons why we didn't get it right. We didn't get it right because our BPD officers were not trained appropriately. We didn't get it right because we didn't have the level of partnership that we have now, right? So you've got what I'm calling this 3-legged stool of the mayor's office, the state's attorney's office, and BPD co-owning, becoming tri-sponsors, if you will, to make sure that it happens right this time. But not just them alone, and they've been doing the work long before I got here. They've been building the foundation for this for well over a year now. But we also have federal partners at the table with us now, so that when we have to employ distributive justice, that actual distributive justice happens. To your point, the 3rd reason why it didn't work the last time is because we were calling folks in and saying, hey, if you want to step away from the life, we got all the wraparound supports that you need, but if you don't, we're going to put you away. And for many who indicated that they wanted to step away from the life, all of the wraparound supports that they needed weren't there. What we've done differently this time is that we've allocated significantly more to this work that we have brought on. In fact, since I've been the executive director here, we've allocated a $1.2 million award to youth advocate programs in Baltimore City who will be administering the program from a community-based perspective to ensure that we've got wraparound supports. These folks that we'll be engaging with will have life coaches. We'll be having active conversations about whether or not they need stipends, living stipends, in order to step away from the life. That's not something that we offered before. We'll be having active conversations about what employment options look like, about what their real barriers are, whether or not they need to move in order to step away from the life, right? Instead of just having generic conversations about wraparound supports. I do think that it's worth noting that we aren't the only ones who have done this twice before getting it right. In Oakland, California, we saw them do it twice before and not get it right for the very same reasons that we didn't. Their 3rd time around resulted in them seeing a 20-year low in shootings and homicides in their city, which translated into a 50% reduction of homicides and shootings in their city, and an exponential increase in their law departments or their police departments clearance rate. And so what's different this time around is that we've got local philanthropy. We've got the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention. We've got partnerships in place. We're being very diligent about the work that we're doing to make sure we get it right. We had BPD officers who were interested in this program actually apply for and interview for it, even though they were already officers, who then had to pass rigorous integrity tests to even get to the next round, to make sure that we're doing it in ways that align with constitutional policing and honoring people's humanity, making sure that we've got the folks calling these folks in that understand that we want to keep people alive and keep people out of jail and keep.
I appreciate that.
Oh, and you asked me about how much it would cost.
Yep.
So as I mentioned, when we were initially talking about Service 618, we raised about $1.3 million across a 3-year, for the 3-year pilot. We've got about an $800,000 gap in that pilot amount right there. Want to be really clear though in sharing with folks that gap doesn't cover the year-over-year expense associated with making sure that we're funding our community partners or providing long-term stipends as we move to navigate folks away from the life, but still give them the means to provide for their families. And so while we're still figuring out the numbers, I would say that by this time in a few weeks, those numbers will have been estimated as I wrap up the violence prevention plan, the finalization of the 5-year strategic plan. We'll have those numbers kind of lined up across the 5 years.
Got it. No, thank you for that. And, I know you're already on this because you're Shantae, but, I'm hoping that we are bringing all partners. I'm thinking about JOTF and Center for Urban Families and, all that are already expert in various strata of this work and can help us. Because, again, I think if we really believe that there is this relatively small group of individuals who are causing havoc in our community and can go one of two ways, we have got to get it right this time. And so I think there's urgency and there's expediency, but I also think doing it right on the front end, investing the resources we need to really have that kind of impact and not have people feel like they got left holding the bag when they tried to step away and there was nothing there for them, I think is absolutely critical. So again, appreciate the thoughtful work you're doing to get into it. And, of course, whatever you need from us, let us know.
Thank you, Councilman.
Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good to see you, Shantae, even though I see you like every week. Actually, the question that I wanted to ask was actually partially asked by Councilman Cohen, but I'll try to pin a finer point. As we think about the group violence reduction strategy, the mayor's plan, your plan for attacking, or rather addressing violent crime in the city, how do we think about the relationship between your office and BPD with regards to funding, with regards to program implementation, and with regards to data? So should we, for instance, see that funding go through your office or go to our partners, or that is the same thing? And likewise, with regards to data, which office, whether it be within BPD or within yours, will be sort of managing that data, keeping track of our progress, and so on and so forth?
Thank you for the question, Councilman. And it's always good to see you. You're right. You and I see each other every week as well. If it's all right, I'm going to answer the question in reverse. So I'll start with data here. So as mentioned in the violence prevention strategy, or the prevention plan with regard to GVRS, the group violence reduction strategy, it is our intention to establish a statting system, GVRS stat, to make sure that we are capturing key metrics that come out of the problem analysis that our technical advisors are completing as we speak, to make sure that we're capturing the right data to hold ourselves accountable for a reduction in the violence that we see in our city. Ultimately, a reduction in the number of not just shootings and homicides that we see, but ideally in the number of folks that we see going to jail as a result of the number of reductions of shootings and homicides that we see in our city. I want to remind folks that this is an interagency collaborative effort. So as I speak to you right now in one of the Baltimore City Incident Command Centers, you've got data analysts from the mayor's office working with data analysts from BPD, working with data analysts from the state's attorney's office. And so while your question is, so who do we go to for the data? I would say that it's going to depend on the data. Some law enforcement data my office just is not legally going to have access to. But if you're talking about the data associated with whether or not we are moving the needle in the right direction with regard to GVRS stat, that's going to be information that you should be able to get directly from my office. So that answers the data question, or from the mayor's office. With regard to your question associated with funding, I think it's a really good question. I'm sure that I'm not the only agency that would sit here and say, hey, sure, like we could all use more resources and all use more funding. I would say that, and I don't mean to keep deflecting, if you will, with regard to the wrap up of the long-term strategic plan, but it really is. I'm on the final leg of finalizing this plan, and now that we've really identified with Baltimore what they want the plan to be, now it's time to talk about, and how much is it going to cost, right? From a strategic planning perspective, it's always the what, and then the who, and then the how. And so we've determined what the what is, how we're going to get it done, and the, yeah. So I would say that answer will come shortly with regard to how much it's going to take to fund the work over the 5 years. And I've committed not only to the council, but also to the state delegation to make sure that you all know as soon as the mayor and I know.
Thank you, Shantae. And I just want to thank you for all the work that you're doing, herding cats, pulling in multiple parties in, and you and your team have been awesome so far, working incredibly fast, faster than I ever thought possible, to pull this thing together. And looking forward to continue to work with you, with the Public Safety Committee to see that through. And of course, anything that we can do to be partners and see that through. I can safely say that every one of my colleagues in and out of the committee want to be a part of that. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Stokes. Councilman Stokes, you got it.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Jackson. Thank you for all your work, and I understand exactly what you mean. I went to a couple of those meetings, and they actually threatened those guys and say, if you don't do this, then we're going to do that. And I knew it wasn't going to work, and you were absolutely right on top of that. Speaking of communities, I know Councilman Conway had mentioned it, but I got about 5 or 6 community association presidents I work with, and I know the community is not the police, they're not the enforcement, and I'm not going to ever ask them to do that. But I have about 6 that want to do some holistic strategies for community safety. It relates to quality of life issues. So you just look for email from us and talk about how we can sit down and address those quality of life. That's the side that I think communities should be working on, and not sometimes we tell a community be the police, but they're actually not. It's the quality of life issue. So I just want to share that with you and just let you know we'll be sending an email to sit down with you so we can address those quality of life issues. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again, Shantae, for all the hard work you're doing.
Thank you, Councilman.
All right, thank you. And colleagues, before we do another quick round, just note that we have another hearing starting in 15 minutes. So if you have a question that is very important, ask it, but please try to keep it brief. Anybody have another question? Show of hands. Councilman Burnett.
Thank you. I'll keep it quick. Director, can you speak to, I guess, so your agency houses a bunch of different types of violence reduction programs, whether that be, because I think ROCA is under your oversight, Safe Streets. There seems to be a new group violence reduction strategy coming to light. Can you speak to, I guess, what is the community, or I guess how are we making sure that these different initiatives are all working together towards a common goal, sharing information, sharing data, those sort of, and I know that was something that came up previously under different leadership, that it seemed like these, even though they were all under one shop, there seemed to be some communication issues on who was supposed to be doing what and where. Can you speak to how you're breaking down those silos?
Yes, I appreciate that question more than you know, Councilman. A few things worth noting are, when I came into the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, the scope had broadened and deepened, given the mayor's holistic approach to public or to violence through the lens of public health. I will say that when I came in, specifically in the gun violence prevention space, you absolutely had ROCA as a multi-year contract that the agency was responsible for overseeing and administering. You had Safe Streets as its own lane and doing work as well. I made an overhaul around how functionally the work was going to be divided in order to break down silos and in order to reinforce cross-lane collaboration. And so my agency is now made up of 4 lanes. The first lane is finance and administration. The second lane is policy planning and coordination. The third lane is gun violence prevention. And the fourth lane is community engagement and opportunity. Now, specific to your question, I did not replace the Safe Streets director that left ahead of me coming on, and instead hired Rashad Singletary as the Gun Violence Prevention Associate Director. So he has overall responsibility for a comprehensive gun violence prevention strategy, which is made up of ROCA, the Group Violence Reduction Strategy, Safe Streets, any other violence intervention prevention programming related to gun violence that we decide to put in place. And that's to make sure that there aren't silos. With regard to data, right now we're actively having conversations about how we capture data across the entire agency instead of in singular lanes, so that we can be really thoughtful about where we see overlap, where we see the need to aggregate and disaggregate information, where we're seeing mitigating factors based on one portion of the team's work when compared to others. And so we are being really thoughtful about how collaboration is happening this time around, having employed some new systems around collaboration within the office to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was my last remaining question.
Okay. Any other colleagues? Show of hands if you have a follow-up question. Anybody? Last call. All right. Thank you very much, Shante, for your presentation. We will now be in recess for another 10 minutes until we come back for the Sheriff's Department at 4:30. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman.